Okay, great. So welcome everybody. I'm Mimi Ito, and I'm a faculty member who floats around several departments around here, including informatics. And I'm really delighted to welcome today one of my closest colleagues in the work that I've been doing for the past 12 years or so around digital media and learning, Nicole Pinkard, who is the director of the School of Design in the College of Computing and Digital Media at DePaul. And, Nicole has been doing some of the most, innovative work that's not just about doing the research, but also doing design and building of new kinds of systems to support learning through new technology, but also really doing the hard work of bringing these programs into the world in a way that is really foregrounding the important imperatives around social equity and access to educational opportunities. So I've been so proud to have Nicole as a colleague for somebody who doesn't just talk about the values of equity and inclusiveness, but really studies it and also bakes it into every aspect of the implementation and deployment of the work that she's been doing. And I'm sure you'll see that commitment in Nicole's work, but Nicole has an incredible track record, not only in the MacArthur digital media and learning work that we've been involved in, but also working with at the regional city level, also NSF and federal level funding and research initiatives, and hopefully you'll get a pretty good flavor of the range of work you've been doing.
You're raising the bar.
I'm going to raise expectations. Okay. So anyway, please welcome Nicole.
Hello. It's been a great day. I've been to Irvine before, but it's been a great day meeting a lot of different people. So hopefully I have something to say that's interesting. So the title of the talk is called, can you hear me? Can y'all hear me? Okay, good. It's Equity by Design and Building Citywide Learning Ecosystems to Expand Youth Access to Connected Learning Opportunities. A lot of words. But pretty much what I'm going to try to do in this talk is to talk through some examples of the work we've done, but to try to frame it around the questions of equity and how we've been trying to think about design and how we've moved from small to big, in the sense how it's really the same issues, but trying to get bigger systems to understand it. So first to say, as a faculty member, I'm always the lucky person who gets to stand up and do the work, but it's always everyone else who's doing the work. So here's my team, part of my team actually that sits back in Chicago. It's probably cold right now. Many of us have been working together for over 10, 12 years. We've been doing this work. And that's been made possible by funding from a lot of different sources and also collaborations with a lot of different people in a lot of different places. So I want to start with this reality in that, and we know that we want youth to do a lot of different things. But in reality, no one aspires to do something, for the most part, unless they've had an opportunity to do it or they come from environments where it's the norm. And so we all aspire to do what's in our surroundings. So if that's the case, then we can focus a lot on changing individuals, or we can really focus on changing and thinking about the environment. And so for me, another way of looking at this is a quote from a now deceased rapper who talked about, and I read this years ago, about the notion of a rose that grew out of concrete. And it's like, did you hear about a rose that grew from a crack in the concrete, providing nature's laws wrong? It learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, too, by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else even cared. And what this speaks to me is that oftentimes we have successes and we'll say one or two people are successful and we think, yes, we've done our jobs, but in reality, are we trying to focus on those successes, or are we really trying to figure out how we get rid of the concrete so that more and more roses can grow? And so if we think about the notion of women, and I'm going to use this example, women in computer science, oftentimes I think about my own experience has probably been, being in Stanford. I think there was 3 of us in computer science, women, women of color in computer science. We felt oftentimes like a rose, like, oh, we're unique. But in reality, what happened in our homes, in our environments growing up that created the reality and the possibility for us to be computer scientists. And we know today, we're seeing data about, I think at Stanford now, 30% of the largest major for computer science, the largest major for women is computer science in Stanford. So something's happening, and so how do we begin to understand what the ecosystem and what the environments are that are taking place? And so we do know that you don't wake up one day and want to do something. There often has to be these connections between people, places, and opportunities. And so this is an example of a called like a learning pathway, where in Chicago we've been trying to think about how do you bring together online opportunities, formal learning opportunities, people that can make it such that girls and anyone can, over a longitudinal period of time, develop the expertise that we're looking for them to develop. And so when we think about that, to become a rose, if you will, one must be able to curate their own learning pathways, the original learning pathways, because you're oftentimes not doing something that you can see in front of you that someone else has done. You have to be very comfortable crossing boundaries and being okay with being uncomfortable. You know, being okay with being comfortable sticking out. And you have to embrace failing on your way to being successful. So for me, I want to show you a couple of examples where in my own life, my ability to be a computer scientist had nothing to do with computer scientists, but had to do with my parents being very intentional around shaping environments for me to be uncomfortable, such that when I got to places of when I said, oh, I want to do CS, I was okay with being different. So one, Mimi loves this picture, is me playing soccer. And as you see, I'm the only girl and only African American, and I was in the 3rd grade. And in this, I remember I signed up for soccer, didn't want to play, but wanted to play, but when I saw everyone on the field, I said, I want to go home. And my father said, get out the car and go. Happened in soccer, but then it also happened in basketball, where I was one of the only girls playing on the team. But why is that? Because I come from, this is a picture of my block where I grew up. And this happened to be, I guess, a lot of trees, so you can't actually see. Almost every house here has a basketball court. And so sports was just a norm, so we all played basketball. But even if you zoom out, I'm going to contextualize this in a second, you see there's a lot of parks. And so for us, sports, soccer, all of that was just the norm because we came from that reality. So when I think about the decision of how to play sports and think about it, it's if you think about a path, it was easy to say, oh, sports or this are going to be something that's going to be meaningful to me. And it also, as I said, created a space to learn things. Now, I live in Chicago, and this is a picture of my block. And you think about a kid, if I grew up in this environment, would I be playing basketball every day, or would I be playing soccer when around me there are no courts, there are those different places? And so the same options of the same little girl who's sitting here, with this reality, looks more like this. You know, it's more like the path. It isn't a clear path. It's multiple complexity of paths. And we're asking that child to make the same decisions, actually to put in a lot more time and energy to do that. So in thinking about how do you make this, how do you simplify this, and particularly from an education standpoint, our work and the work that Mimi and I, all of us have been doing over the years is saying it can't just be the school's responsibility, and it can't just be the homes. We have to think about what John Goodland said, and think about it has to be a network, a community, an ecosystem of schools, homes, all the places where we spend our time that have to be intentionally connected together such that actually the interactions are invisible and they're not conscious. You're not consciously thinking about everything you do as building you to the next level. And so for the last 12 years, we've been involved in trying to think about how do you create these systems, and mainly around the development of kids' ability to develop digital literacies. As a computer scientist, when we started this work 12 years ago, we debated whether to do digital or computational, but the technology tools weren't there, I think, to actually think about having 5th graders, you know, code across home and school. So we focused on digital literacies. And so our question was, how do we create learning ecosystems where digital, and now I would throw in computational literacies, are so valued, are such a valued form of social and academic capital that youth put in the work in and out of school. So the same way I put in the work and people put in the work on the sports cards, how do you begin to say you want to put in the work to develop the literacies? And while right now I'm not going to go through all these examples because it would be a much longer talk, I'm going to talk about at least 3 of the types of projects we've done over the last, about 15, yeah, it's been a long time, the last 10, 12 years, where we've been exploring this question one at a time. So the first is going to be just briefly about our work in the middle school in the south side of Chicago, where the question was, how do we create environments where digital literacies, as I said, are valuable, and such that our kids don't look any different from the kids who live in Silicon Valley. So could we understand what the ecosystem needs to be? So if you look at the portfolio of work as 8th graders, you'll say, oh, I can't tell where they're from. Second, I'm not going to talk about UMedia, but we then transferred that work to say in the work we did with Mimi and based on Mimi's book, Camargo, how do we do this at a city level so that all the high schoolers have access to it? And then we moved to thinking about it truly at a city level, where you bring all the organizations in the city who do informal learning, bring them together. And then finally, I'm going to go back to where we now went back and we're focusing now much more on, well, how do we do this for girls? And so if we have the ecosystem, how do we now go back and think about the design of programs, particularly around girls and their development of being computational makers? So for us, over the years, what we've come up with as the core components of the work we do for developing equity across spaces is intentionally thinking about the role of school, after school, home, and community, and how each of these play a different role. They each have a different set of affordances. But they all need access to adults and mentors play, and adults play different roles. How do we think about the integration of artifacts, the role of creating, how does it play in the space? How do we think intentionally about the uniqueness of each individual learning space? And how do we, and I think more importantly, is how do we think about showcase? If I don't see what you do or see what you create, why am I going to inspire to want to do it? One of the best things about YouTube is that you can see other people's videos, and I can see your videos, and now I want to create my own videos. And if we think about the world of school, we seldom actually see someone else's work. If you're a 6th grader going into a new middle school, do you have any idea of what it means to be a successful 6th grader in that school? Do you walk in and are you surrounded by work? And you say, oh, this is what I'm going to be able to do when I graduate. So for us, it's thinking about the use of showcase spaces. So I'm going to dive into the Renaissance Academy. And I will say this, if you have a question at any point in time, raise your hand, ask, challenge me, love it. My graduate program, we had things called fights, so every talk was a fight. And so you were used to people telling you your idea it sucked. So feel free to challenge. We created in 2005 an initiative called Digital Network, which was funded by MacArthur Foundation, and it was supposed to be an existence proof of what do you have to do to ensure that kids on the South Side, as I said, have developed digital literacies. And for us, there were 3 main components: the school, where we did media arts classes, which the goal was to develop a base set of literacy. So we wanted to be able to say to a teacher, every kid in the 6th grade by winter quarter can do a podcast. Every 7th grader can make a movie at this point of the year. So there's a base set of skills that teachers can rely on. But then in the after school, we focused on passion driven. So kids can stay and say, I really want to do robotics. And there's their choice to do it. And in after school, we use mentors. Home, a lot of self-directed learning. And then we connected all of this together with social networks, with our own social network system, so that at any point in time, 24/7, and literally it was 24/7, kids were online. And the questions we had to answer to do this, how do we use how do you have mentors, formal artists? How do you help them work across formal and informal settings? How do you create opportunities for youth to critique and view each other's work? What are just a core set of digital literacies that everyone needs to have? And of course, opportunities to showcase. That work, I'm not going to really dive into it, but there's a book, Digital Youth Network, which is a book we did with Bridget Barron out of Stanford, which really dives into the work but gives you very rich cases of 8 kids. It shows their work over a longitudinal period of time. And what came out of this are the core components is we have a mentoring framework, and as I said, the use of media arts classes, and the use of a social network. The data, and I'll give you a little more details on that, but the data, when we compared the kids in Chicago to a group of kids in Silicon Valley, at the beginning of the 6th grade and at the end of the 8th grade, the kids in Chicago ended up with more depth of experiences and more breadth of experiences. And these are things like, have you ever built a website, built a robot, built a piece of art, just 16 digital activities. And the kids in Chicago at the end of the 8th grade year, 82% think that's right. Sorry for getting the numbers now. 82% have more experiences than the kids in Silicon Valley. And how that happened is because, as again, there was the layering of experiences. So in the school, you had record label and digital storytelling. You know, these are the base classes. And after school, you had all of this, and then you had the social networking side. So everywhere a kid went, the development of digital literacies was available, but also, more importantly, it was a valued form of social capital. So it was as valuable as making the basketball team. And so in that sense, the kid was putting in their own work because they wanted to be popular in whatever way they meant, and so they want to put in the time. And here's an example of one young man in his, over a period of time, his own articulation of himself as it changed. So he was a gamer. And so in interviews in the 7th grade, he's like, I'm a 6th grade, I'm a game head. You know, I just want to play games. I'm here every Tuesday. You know, everyone knows that I like to make games. So he's in 7th grade. He's more like, okay, well, maybe I might think about doing this when I grow up. And in the 8th grade, because of, I don't know here, but in Chicago in the 8th grade, you have to think about where you're going to high school, and so it's a really big year. So now he's like, okay, what's the career related to this? And he's now thinking of himself as an engineer. But he's also very intentional around the number of years. So like, this is important because I'm having 11 years in this. And what we're now seeing, this young man and his cohort, and I show at the end, I'll end with a video with someone in his cohort. They're in sophomores in college now, and out of the group, the 75 kids we were following, at least 65% of them are doing something digital media technology related as college careers. And this is mainly for actually having an intervention pretty much only the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade year. So the importance of this to me is that you can create these ecosystems that allow kids over time to develop new identities. But it's not something that develops instantaneously. So, you know, if we had stopped the intervention at the end of the 7th grade, 6th grade, we wouldn't have seen the effects. It was the ability to layering on from year in and year out. But the problems of this particular work was upon graduating, these kids all went to multiple different high schools. So at that point, the value, the social capital value of being digitally literate wasn't really that valuable because they were in high schools that it didn't matter. And so we were tracking to see, well, did they still create or did they stop? And in reality, many of them stopped. But the interesting thing is now we see in college, somehow they came back to it. So we were like, uh-oh, when we started looking at the data in their high school, like, did we just do all this for naught? Because at that point, the social capital, it wasn't relevant. And then that led us into the work in U-Media, which really was based on Mimi's book, Hamago, which was about, can you create a space that first, this is the interesting thing about U-Media is it's the simplest idea, but if you think about it, where Irvine might be a place that actually does this. In Chicago, there were no places for high schoolers to go besides their high school when they were outside of school, and to be okay with not doing something intentional. So you can't just go and hang out. You had to be doing something. So I'm an after-school program, I'm here for a reason. Besides the mall, there was no place to be. So the library are places where kids feel like they can be. And so just by putting a space that was high school only, it became a beacon for high schoolers to say, hey, you mean I can be here and I don't have to do something intentional? So they chose to be there. So we worked with, working with Mimi to create U-Media was a space where you can hang out, you can try things out, you can mess around, and then in some sense you can geek out. But what we found, what made it wasn't like the space is important. What really wasn't, it wasn't the space. It was really the access to adults and mentors who knew their stuff and who was willing to work with them that stood out time and time again. And they said this, it was the acceptance that sometimes it's okay to chill without creating a chill-only space. So they wanted to be able to come in on Monday and say, I don't want to do anything. But if every day they came in and there were no expectations for them to do something, that wouldn't work. So it's the balance of figuring it out. And what we saw over time is that, and this is a young lady who's actually a senior. Now she just graduated. She just graduated from DePaul. That you see over time is that their work was more than just across your media. Let me see how to explain this one. You really can't read it. But across the top are all the different programs that she was in at different times. And across the bottom is our data around the different types of artifacts she's uploaded. And so we can begin to see that, oh, all of a sudden she's uploading photography. And why is that? Because she took a photography class in someplace else. So this was our first ability to sort of look at how learning opportunities across the city were brought to bear in the media space, where we weren't actually teaching everyone everything, but it became a space where they wanted to show what they were doing. And so that made us go, well, there has to be, how can we do a better job of making visible to kids what the learning opportunities are? And so I want to show you that next, but I forgot to do this, and which was really important. So they talked about adults. And what we realized in working with Bridget, again, is that it wasn't just that they want a mentor, but the mentors were playing all these different roles. So mentors were being audience members, the kids were teaching them, the mentors were promoting, they were monitoring. So at any one point in time, the interactions between, not just between mentors and students, but peers and peers, where all these roles were being played. And so one of the things we're trying to understand is how do you intentionally allow adults to play those roles? So here's an example of what it means to play some of these. So audience is simple. In a social network, you upload something and I can look at it, right? So I'm an audience member. But how do you know that someone's used your work? How do you, what's an encourager? How are you explicitly encouraging kids to do work? And one of the most important ones is a learning broker. How do you, for many of the kids we work with, they don't have learning brokers. Parents are normally learning brokers, and parents say, oh, I want you to do this program or that program. But how do we intentionally support adults with connecting kids to the learning opportunities that we know are out there in the community? So back to this example, this young lady's parents were very intentional about putting her in all these programs. But is it possible with technologies and with other ways to make it easy that other kids know about all these different learning opportunities to connect together? And so that led us to this realization that there was we needed to understand the relationship to access and visibility, and that oftentimes you might have visibility in what opportunities are, but not have access, or you might have access and you have and not have visibility. And that where you sit on this 2x2, there's a lot of different types of design interventions that one would take. So if my access is high, but my visibility is low, I just don't know what's going on. So how do I, create portals to, push information to you? Well, maybe I know what's going on, but I don't have the ability to get there. So now I need to figure out, can I give you online learning, or can I figure out the transportation? So our challenge was, in the project we've been working on the last couple of years, is to really figure out this relationship between visibility and access, such that kids, regardless of where they live in Chicago, can have access to learning opportunities. And that's this project, the City of Learning. And what it is, and I think these screens are you're not gonna believe, I did something wrong with the screen, but I'll tell you what it is. So this is a website in Chicago that has over 6,000 learning opportunities for kids available. And about 5,500 of them are face-to-face learning opportunities, and about 300 to 400 of them are online. And so a kid can go in and say, here's my interests, and they can, they ask them questions, and then it recommends to you, these are the learning opportunities that you can do based on where you live and based on what it is that we know about you. What it also does is it badges their learning experiences, and it tries to, and we're actually trying to really work with parents, particularly of the younger kids, to help them understand what kids are doing. So if a kid earns a badge, we send a text message to the parent and says, here's 2 questions you might want to ask your kid about what they learned today. So we sort of help guide them in trying to facilitate conversations. And what it looks like, this is an example of the search. You can go in and search, either can recommend to you or you can go in and search. And in Chicago right now, there's over 120 organizations that have put their programs here. And that seems simple, but in reality, in most cities, if you say, I want to know what I can do for my kid, you're searching on Google. And those programs have ended. There really isn't ways to say, oh, now I want to search in this particular neighborhood, or I want to search for this particular age range. I mean, it's like the digital, if you really think it's the digital library work, that y'all were doing back in a long time ago, but trying to bring this all to bear and make it accessible. An example of opportunities you have are self-paced activities, events, places, hubs, where are places where I can go, and it can recommend to you, here's the places where technology is accessible, what are the programs, and then what are the communities that are available. So all of these are different types of artifacts and opportunities that are put together for you. And the last thing I'll say on this is that I don't know what people think about badging, but we've done badging, that we've made badging part of it. Mainly because not, for me, it's not badging for the sake of saying, this is what I know, but it's badging that's milestones along the way. So I want to look back at, so for instance, there's a popular rapper out now called Chance the Rapper, who was one of our kids. Now, many kids are like, oh, we just want to be like Chance, but we can go back to the 5th grade and tell you, here's all the music he's created, here's the programs he's in. So he didn't just wake up, we think of reality TV, he didn't just wake up overnight and become who he is. There's a whole path. So wouldn't it be great if you can actually say, hey, let me follow in his footsteps and actually be able to see the cookie crumbs, the milestones along the way in which he got there. So for us, badging is more relevant from that standpoint of actually showing you the path, less about does this one individual badge mean that you have some expertise. But with these badges, we are able to do, it gives us some data that we can do some interesting things. And one of them is, let me go back a second. One of the things about, okay, if I can stop. One of the things, I'll say here, okay. One of the things about City of Learning, and it's so why it's not just a technology platform, it's really the relationship that works with the city, is every kid in the city of Chicago has an account. Now, every kid in the city of Chicago doesn't use it, but every kid has an account. And why that's important is because we then can say, here, next. We can then now tell you who's participating and who's not participating. So we can look at any block in the city and say, here's the kids who live here, here's their demographics, what have they participated in, what haven't they participated in, what's even available to them, right? So it's one thing, so our mayors say, we want every kid, Chicago's a city that codes. You could say that, and then you say, okay, we're a city that codes. But when we look at the data, and I'll show you in a second, there's very few places in the city of Chicago where you can learn to code. And guess what, if you're on the south side and the west side, which are predominantly African American, Hispanic, there's even fewer places to code. So the expectation of what it takes to be a coder for coming from those populations is much higher. So how do we then as a city use that data to become a smart city and say, hey, we can be much more strategic about where we offer programs. How do we tell our funders to say, which they told me, Nicole, your programs are in downtown Chicago where we have a lot of coding opportunities. We're not going to fund you this summer to do another program in downtown Chicago. You need to put your programs on the south side or the west side because that's where the data is showing us. So what we're trying to do with these data systems is really trying to use what we know about kids, use what we know about programs, and try to be more strategic and just in time in terms of providing the opportunities where they come. And what that has told us that yes, we have let's say we have 83,000 kids who are participating, but that also tells us we have 300,000 kids who aren't, right? And so if that matters to you, then you are going to be much more strategic about how you bring this all together. And so I think where the interesting intersect of technology and learning is at play is when we can be a smart city and when we can begin to use this data to all come together and say, how do we collectively do this? And so now our program providers, 120, they now have their own data reports. Like, so right now it shows you this data report. They have one of their own. Each program has their own. And they can say, well, where do my kids live? Who's doing what? What are my demographics? Am I serving girls? Am I serving boys? What's the racial makeup of who I'm serving? And so they're now saying, hey, we need to partner together because I think I need to be trying to do things a little differently. And so the questions we've now started asking, working in partnership with Bill Pinwell out of Boulder, is, well, is there a language, algorithms that we can think about what it means to have if you think about food deserts, learning deserts, is there a way that we can sort of show where the learning deserts, and so that, the same way I might go buy a house because I'm thinking about the school, I'm gonna think about where I live because of, the learning opportunities that might make my political alderman now do something differently because he doesn't want to be called the neighborhood that is, in Chicago we definitely have some food deserts, and so when the neighborhood gets called a food desert, the aldermen move into action because that represents them. So how do we hold them accountable for helping to make some of this happen? So questions: how do we understand neighborhoods in respect to their diversity and abundance, and how do we understand the different types of programs? So here's an example. So in Chicago, those 6,000 programs that I showed you, if we think about all of our programs are broken down by these particular categories. What did I tell you the mayor said we're a city that codes? Look at the coding opportunities. We're a city that sports, right? This is and the high, mid, and low has to do with the income level of the community. So in this sense, it's not like coding is really nowhere. But if you look at where are the most of your sports in the low income, and in Chicago, that's because our parks are mainly the provider of those particular resources. But this type of representation of the data, when we put it in front of the mayor, in front of the folks, they were like, whoa, wait a second. We need to think about what we're doing. And so in working with the folks from Colorado, we've come up with some ways of thinking about program abundance. So now we can say if there's 11 types of programs, these are interactive maps that you can look on and click on your neighborhood and say, well, what types of the 11 types, how many, what are we offering? Is my, where am I in the red, green, and blue of red, green, and yellow here of offerings? Then not just programs, but how many programs am I offering? So which neighborhoods aren't offering? So the red means, okay, wait a second, I'm behind. We're not offering enough. And this data has now is being put in front of not just the politicians, but also the program providers. And now working with the school district, put it in front of the some of the LSCs. That so the schools are trying to, particularly because of our violence issues, are trying to see can they bring the program providers in internally. So I want to, so with that context of, and this work is still ongoing, me at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, I started this work trying to understand how to create the digital and computational literacies of kids. And so now we have a way of understanding, are we having some impact? Now we can go back in and say, let's think about the design of the programs. So I want to give you an example of what we're doing in that space, more program based. And this is work funded out of NSF, and it's about closing the gaps to participating in computer science and really thinking about middle school girls and what needs to happen and what's the environments that need to be created to allow middle school girls to be more engaged in STEAM, not just in middle grades, to persist in it once they get into high school. So we all know the barriers are the experience gap, lack of confidence, the negative stereotypes, and oftentimes the climate of the classrooms. I've taught camps and I've taught coding programs at the school I talked about earlier. And it's hard if you have a group of 6th grade boys who want to code and they're in this programming camp to make that a hospitable place for also 8th grade girls. That mixture, if you think about middle, it's just not and tell them they have to work on a project. That's just, you have to be a phenomenal teacher to make that work, and I must not have been, because that was a hard one. And so the realization is maybe it's not one environment, that we have to think about creating different environments. So, and we know there's a whole bunch of programs out there, Girls Who Code, everything is building up to this. But one of the things we decided to do is to not focus on coding per se, but to focus more on computational making and to figure out how could we sort of make coding necessary, but not the focus of what we're doing. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, quick. I love in your presentation. Quick question in the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't anything about hardware, lack of hardware, like iPhones, laptops, things like that. And usually when you hear about the digital divide, one of the big problems is kids from low-income families or families can't afford all this stuff. So how do they maintain those online spaces when they're going through your program, that kind of thing?
No, so that's a good question. So we capture that data, but we don't have it. We don't have it represented in this sense. Chicago has something called Connect Chicago, which they can give you a map of where the divides are. But I would say, and I don't, it probably isn't politically correct by saying, at the end of the day, we did one-to-one programs on the South Side and had parents pay, and most places went in, they have the technology. Now, they might have smartphones, and the data would show that particularly urban environments have more smartphones, but also with where the Chicago and their schools, the internet access, and also the libraries have internet access, and I think they just passed something where we're probably about to go to access across the whole city. We haven't found, I think our biggest thing has been more transportation than the actual internet access. You have the PlayStation, and then we also have Internet Essentials. I don't know if they do Internet Essentials here. where Comcast gives you the free $9 a month and a free computer. It was actually it's had pretty good saturation in Chicago because they also forgave people's past due bills to allow them to have it. But it's definitely it's a issue. But I've probably taken rightfully or wrongfully the approach that the access to the technology is there, and you'll get it if you believe it's important enough to get it. Our experience has been when parents like, oh, there's some utility in this, they actually get more access. And I look at the fact that one of the first things I do is say, okay, if you have on a $100 pair of shoes, you can get a laptop, or you can get access to the equipment. That might not be the right thing, politically correct thing to say, but it's proven successful. And then we also, another thing to say, in our libraries, we have, with the work we've done with UMedia, we now have 20 UMedia spaces, 20 UMedias in the libraries where kids can go in and use Macs and PCs every day until the library closes. So our goal was to figure out how do we design and understand what the ecosystem has to be to engage girls in coding. And so we created a program. We have a program called Digital Divas. It's Digital Youth Divas now, but someone has emailed me and said Digital Divas has been trademarked, so I can't use it. So, somebody at my own university, I'm like, you could have told me that 2 years ago. Well, you know it. So we try to integrate people in spaces and different types of activities. So I am not creating unique learning activities. Other people have created those, and we're taking that work and we're trying to figure out how do we contextualize it in a way that girls find engaging. So it's a lot of creating projects, a lot of scaffolding, creating customized learning resources, and figuring out the design of the spaces that where girls want to be. And so an example of that is you have to create an e-cuff, design an e-cuff in a way that lights up, and actually they design multiple of these, and they're learning circuits and things like that. Now, what's interesting in the approach that we try to take to this is trying to use the role of narratives, and we're trying to use the Hide and Renninger's model of motivation, interest development, and their model would say that situational interest, that part of the reasons that girls or anyone might not be engaged in technologies, like I was saying about the clubhouse or computer coding, is initially you're putting them in spaces that aren't engaging. So you sort of have to initially have environments that are very engaging. Very much, I want to be there just because I want to be there. I might not have any interest in coding whatsoever. So let me focus on the creation of the environment. But over time, I need to sort of fade away some of those supports, so that you have developed the ability to sort of persist in environments where everyone isn't like you. And so our approach to doing this is the creation of narratives. So how do we create these narrative stories? Think of the Babysitter Club books. How do we create these characters, these middle school girls that are called Digital Divas, in these book series and animation series, who are doing all these things using STEM, that you're trying to do the same thing that they are. And then you're trying to do it in your real life. Now our challenge was, and I'll explain this in a second, is that we're like, wow, we're trying to work with a very different audience, diverse audience. So how do we come up with one set of images that are going to be appealing to everyone? So our first approach did not work. We said, well, let's come up with these sketches that really represents no one. And the girls told us that was the worst thing we did. They said, I really like it, but I think a little color might be useful. Yeah. So we went from sketches to then bringing in, starting to do more comic animations of it this way. And where we ended up with is we're doing animatics, where we have comic book artists who are actually creating characters. And what it looks like, this is actually not the finished one, but what it looks like, what the blended space looks like, we have our own online social network environment where you see the narratives play out, and you're given a challenge of something to do. You do your work, you upload it over here, and then you're interacting with the characters. But at the same time, you're in these physical face-to-face spaces where you're being supported and doing the work. And so girls are doing the work in the programs, but they're also doing the work at home. And they're doing, STEM is embedded in the project. So in essence, you're creating an e-cuff, your circuits, basic e-cuff to make it light up. But now you can then do a t-shirt where it can be very complex. And just the complexity of the circuits that they create, because they want this shirt that they want to wear to school, they're really diving into circuitry and things like that. And so we've seen the same project. You'll see girls do 4 and 5 versions of the same project, designed differently for different audiences, and their parents and their friends start asking them for products. So which is leveling up their knowledge. We've done it in e-fashion. We've also done it in programming, where they're teaching these animated characters to dance using like a block code language, and they're iterating on the work. And so what we've seen in the Hide and Renninger model is that these blended spaces are motivating them. And looking at the data, we're beginning to see that for us, if they do the work at home, that's telling us that they're beginning to develop some sense of identity. So our mentor model, what it takes to support this, is 3 types of mentors. We have program mentors who are, so one of the things, let me back up, one of the things that we realized, we realized there early on is that the challenge with doing this type of work is that oftentimes you can't find mentors who both understand the technical knowledge, understand the cultural capital, connect with the kids, and who can be in a place at 3 o'clock and after school. So we broke down the models and the mentoring in different ways. We have program mentors who oftentimes are high school students or college students who create the environment. They're like a little older than the girls, and they're like, I want to be like them. We don't expect them to have too much technical knowledge, but they need to create a space that girls want to be. Then we have the online mentors who might come in and just do the feedback and critique of the work. They never meet them. They don't know who they are, but they're doing a lot of the assessment. And most of the assessment is one way. And then we have the content mentors who might do video tutorials, and they might be, so when we're doing App Inventor, it's the MIT folks who are in MIT doing the work. And what you see when you look at the analysis of the social network data, if you look at the youth, you see who they're interacting with. You see very different interaction patterns between they're interacting with the online mentors, a lot more interaction with the online mentors than the program mentors. They're not interacting with the program mentors. That's because they don't need to. The program mentors are there with them face to face, so there's no reason to be online. But you get to see that the online mentors and the content mentors are playing a valuable role, and so we've extended the opportunity and the access to mentors just by using this. So an example of how this plays out is here's and how we're trying to do this from a data standpoint. Here's a young lady, she's a 6th grader. This is, some data about her, but using a tool from Bridget Barron, technobiographies that we've been using for years, we begin to see how her use of these types of literacies are being developed across homeschool, after school. And we've annotated her projects where we interview her about individual projects. So here, this is where she's created how she's joining social networks. She's talking about what she's doing in social networks. She's talking about my eyesight is bad. I can't even read this on my own screen. Talking about where she, working on technology teams at school. But then here, you're beginning to see, these are the projects she did with us, the Move Flower and things like that. And so she's talking about, okay, so the first time, I got to do one of these mood flowers, and she's beginning to use the language of warm and cool colors and things like that. And she's adding videos along her work. And so what we see over time is that once she was doing the work in the after school, she began to do the work up in the community. And so what you begin to see, this is where I say their parents and friends are asking them to share the work. They begin to see that this is valuable, and now they want to put in more interest. So over time, we expect to see that the work that they do in the after school makes its way into the community. And so that's for us to begin, for us to understand that yes, identity is mattering. And so for us, our goal is to try to make learning as a lifestyle. So I want to end with a video. Of a young man who play the video. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but a clip of one of the young men that we worked with starting in the 5th grade, and he's now a sophomore at NYU, and him talking about how he views himself and his development of literacies, because this is what the ultimate end goal is.
I'm Robert Jalen Jackson. I'm 18. I go to NYU. Side of Chicago. then we would take some classes in which they would teach us different ways to use different types of technology. I think 6th grade we did record labels, which is pretty tight. I was a graphic artist, so I made mixtape covers. And then I went to high school at Kenwood Academy, and around the end of my freshman year, my friend Abdullah brought me over to the Art Center for a program. Through that, I've learned like 2 different aspects of like learning and teaching.
We're at the Hyde Park Art Center. It's like a second home to me. I've been coming here since my sophomore year of high school with multiple programs. I feel like when I came here, I didn't really have the idea of being an artist. I was just kind of a guy that really like drew stuff or like made videos, and it was just kind of an entertainment thing. It was just something that was fun to do. But I never really thought of it as like something that was like artistic. I just thought it was just some passing time. This is the only place I've come to where they like call the students artists off bat, like because you're creating something. So like you are an artist. You aren't just a dude that's just like drawing stuff. You're actually creating, you're making art. And that's not something that usually places do. They say these are the artists up here, and you're trying to get to there. But in reality, if you're making, you're an artist. And I feel like the Art Center gives you that mentality. And then since you feel like an artist, you think like an artist. I want to say nobody around like the age from 14 to 17 really wants to share what they make, because like then you don't want to like put it out there and then get put down or like have anything like come back at you like maybe you should change this. You want to think everything you do is like on point, even if you don't think it's on point. You want to like think that everybody else thinks it's on point. But like having that community in here where you feel safe, and you do critiques and you like make friends here that'll help you out with your artwork and give you real feedback instead of just like that wishy-washy feedback that you get at school. They're like, it's cool. And you're just like, but what can I do? And you're like, I don't know, just whatever. But like here, it's like, you find specifics that you can do. Everybody kind of bounces off each other with ideas and bounces off each other with creativity. It's like prototyping. You like don't always get it right on the first time. You gotta make like a whole bunch of like different models before it gets to where you want it to get to. And I feel like having people around you that give you that mindset is something that the Art Center really does as well. My name is Jalen. I'm going into my second year at NYU. I do not have a favorite medium. I like whatever I get my hands on, truthfully. Brother Mike was my mentor like 6th grade through like till he passed. And like I'd say he seemed like kind of a big brother father figure to me, because I never really thought of him as like some dude like that worked at the school or anything, that worked at the library. And he was somebody that would try to push me to do something like that he knew I could do. Like if he had a new program with graphic design or like poetry, like video, he'd be like, you should hop in on this and try that out and everything. He'd try to push that and like try to give me different opportunities to like stretch what I already know how to do and like learn new things and get new experiences. Through that, I did a lot of different programs at BYM that have really helped me out. Like I did one book on Chicago, a Mercy project, in which I made a book cover for Toni Morrison's book on Mercy. I did B&V, which is Brave New Voices, and I just did a lot of different things. Whether he'd always push me to do different opportunities, and it was nice to have that person that would push you, but also not like be too aggressive, and he'd allow you to kind of do your own thing, and then he'd be like a pal to you. So if you need anything, you go to him as well. Today I'm here with Chicago City of Learning, and we are at Bryn Mawr Church on 70th and Bryn Mawr, and this is one of the sites for the mobile van. What we do is we go around the city to mainly the south side, and we bring technology to kids in order for them to learn like different uses of it, ranging from app creation to graphic design to prototyping to music production, just kind of all over. I like it. You gotta add more to the end though. You gotta make it drop for real. That'd be hot. I feel like me being a mentor is different than a lot of other people because I'm rather young, and so I kind of just try to blend in with them and kind of more be like, as what Mike was, to be like an older brother type figure and kind of just like help them out but joke around and mess with them, make sure they get.
I'm gonna stop it there, but I wanted to show that because it seamlessly shows him as a learner, then him as a, oh, this got louder. Him as a learner, him as a learner as a young kid, and then him.
You turned it off.
Okay. Him as a learner, okay. Okay. Him as a learner, as a young kid, and the seamlessness, the unconsciousness of the flowing, and not just one place, because it's never one place where you learn it. So, I'm talking about UMedia and DYN, but guess, I can tell you a narrative that we did everything for Jalen, but, he was also at Hyde Park Art Center. So it's the multiple places that come together to help create, and then the roles of mentors, and now he's a mentor himself. And so the goal of these ecosystems is to make it unconscious in such a way and blend it such that you don't even really realize that how all of these things come together. So with that, I'm going to stop and open up for questions. Oh, sorry.
And that experience, I feel like I've been.
Any questions? Yes.
You mentioned the cohorts. As the kids spread out to schools around the area, did some of the cohorts stay together even though they were at various schools?
They, yes and no. Like, so the students who really had a passionate identity, particularly around, let's say, music and around video, because that's really, I would say, what DYN at that point was really more known for, they stayed together. And they found their way to UMedia, the library, and that became part of the reason we created new media. We decided to participate in UMedia is because our high schoolers, our kids, they kept constantly coming back to the school. And we're like, okay, y'all gotta go. It's like, y'all can't be here. And like, really, for the rules and purposes, they couldn't. So they stayed together. But they had also been to school together from kindergarten, so their social circles. And I would say that's a charter school. It's it was 90%, 80-some% low income, but it's a charter school. So you still know it's still a little bit different demographics. But we have seen, I think one of the best things about the UMedia spaces is that it brings kids across the city, and you have 2 kids sitting there, you have no idea what school they've gone to, the socioeconomic status, a 9th grader working with a 12th grader, and it's all about your ability and your skills. And the biggest users of the library used to be, and hopefully it's still that, were African American males, to the point that parents will come to the library and say, I just want to check to make sure that my son is here, because if your kid tells you they're going to the library 3 days a week, you're like, yeah, right. And I think one of the things that Mimi helped us understand is we were fretting about, why aren't they all geeking out? Remember this whole conversation, we're like, they're not geeking out, they're not geeking out. And it's like, well, every kid doesn't geek out, but the fact that you're exposing them to things and you're helping them find what their passion is, in reality, then the importance of having to broker and connect them across the city. So Jalen needed to go to the Hyde Park Art Center because that's a specialized place for art. So we have to get away. One of the things, the hardest thing is working with organizations is letting them let go of kids, right? It's like, it's not to keep the kid from 6th grade to 12th grade. You need to help them find the place that makes the most sense to them. And the challenge with that is funding models, because we're not funded to let go of kids. And so I think the biggest work we've done in Chicago is helping organizations figure out their pipelines, and so they feel like when they're handing a kid off, they can get the kid. And so that makes them okay with doing it. Anyone else? Question? Yes?
You mentioned earlier in your talk about computational literacy versus digital literacy. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yes. So the digital, when I think about digital literacy, I think more about making movies, making videos, graphic designs. And computational literacy, and you could still be making those things, but you're probably using coding and making and bringing those to life. So for us, we've tried to think less around actually saying we're teaching you the code for the sake of code, but how are you using code to design? So for instance, the e-textile, so you can make a cuff and it's just sewing, but now why don't I make this cuff respond? How do I make it such that, using Arduino and having the code to Arduino and things like that. So we're trying to do more computational making, where the computation is embedded in, and less of coding for the sake of coding, because we found when we've done it that way, we don't see them persist. They'll do it, but then if you look for, they're not doing it after the project's in. But I would say the computational literacy is probably recently for us in the last couple of years, we've really gotten back to that because I think the tools are there. Now that they're open source and available, that a kid can do this at home, at school, and use the same tools. Before you had to use set tools, and one of our rules is that we wouldn't use any software that they couldn't easily get access to at home, because we didn't want them to be stuck. We're saying, I gotta be at this place to actually use it. Any other questions?
Yeah,
don't quite know how to phrase this, but you mentioned a few times places of worship, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with them. Does that include Muslim churches as well as Christian churches, and what about kids who actually don't want to be affiliated with a place of worship?
Well, so in essence, any place that wants to be part of, really more so for the City of Learning work, any place that's doing programming that wants to be part of it and badge, we accept. And in reality in Chicago, the safe places in the summer, the churches play a tremendous role. And that's where you can go get lunch and things like that. So we don't intentionally go out and say we're looking for churches, but we're saying, hey, this is what we're doing. Are you partnering? How can we support you? And actually our churches, particularly for our African American population, is one of the best places to get information out. And they have computer labs. Many of them have computer labs. And so we have, with some recent work we've been doing with the Stevens Fund, Christopher Stevens Fund, and working with some partners in Morocco, have been working in more Muslim areas, and also in some of the schools. And there's it is a different norm, and you have to be conscious about the type of products and activities that you take in there, because you have to be sensitive to the rules and norms at all.
Thank you.
So the kind of ecosystem you've set up is very powerful. And I was wondering to what extent you think there are opportunities to overlay other kinds of outcomes, not just digital literacy, but violence prevention, health promotion.
Yeah, I think
Or is that stacking it too much?
No. I think it's the layers. I mean, that's all based in Tableau. So in essence, we have a Tableau server and the data, and you can create different types of, your filterings and things like that. And it's really about the data. It's like what data is tied to kids and tied to space. And so Chicago has, we have a crime lab. So, one of the interesting things becomes this, and we struggle with this. Because we have data of kids' participation, we can actually tell you this kid was at this place on Wednesday. Now, we're in Chicago. What does that mean to partner with the crime lab that has data on crimes? And you want to be careful about the ability to connect this. So there's things we can do, and there's things we're really trying to be sensitive around this, because we don't want our data sets to be used in ways in which they shouldn't. So the privacy issue around what you make available, who you make available to, and how you're layering data on is really, I think it's just, we're only scratching the surface. But I will say that the crime lab also has relationships with, the interesting thing, the crime lab in Chicago has the best data relationship with CPS. Than any, it's easier to get data from them than it is for us to get data for educational purposes. So we are, it's those data sets exist in Chicago. Does have this 311 open data policy, but when it gets to the student, this type of participation data, I think we're trying to be overly sensitive and trying to come up with new policy rules that the kids and parents say we're willing to share our data with these particular places.
Yeah, I was thinking more that the social capital you're creating among the kids and the mentors could be leveraged with various kind of learning modules to enhance, understanding of health issues.
So you mean like more so the ability to sort of recommend and provide access?
Yeah, to put information there that addresses a lot of issues in the community, not just the.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So you could actually using something like Every Block, which exists, is something, I don't know if it exists other places, but it's very much tied to your location and gives you very targeted information. And that Comcast does it, and we populate Every Block with, like one simple thing is taking some of the work that kids do and populate Every Block, so when someone's going on Every Block to look at crime, they actually see good product work that kids have done. But then the ability to push like these tidbits of information. So we have a SMS that's built in now. But we're trying to understand the cost factor. So are there 1-800? What's the equivalent to a 1-800 number for SMS that we can push learning opportunities to kids and not feel like we're using their data plan? And that's working with Verizon to see. Can we do that? Because that's our sensitivity, is we don't want to be pushing information to kids that takes them over their data plan and then they get home and then their parents are.
Or you can use WhatsApp or something.
Yeah, the $19 billion Anyone,
We
other
have time
questions?
for one more question?
Yes, sir.
If I recall correctly, you said that you had one student who, in middle school, he was flourishing a lot with this program, and then he went on to high school and he didn't have the same opportunities. Is that correct?
Yeah, so part of the journey, if you will, from the learning journey was like seeing that for them and saying, well, what should we do? And that's where we had why the City of Learning came up. But that young man ended up he's in community college right now, we actually just found this out because I was trying to track him. Because actually I had lost contact with him. I was trying to track him down, and I actually tracked him down 3 days ago through one of his teachers. So he is actually in community college doing the beginning. He wants to do coding, so he's at the beginning of their work.
The reason I ask about that is that I would imagine, like some kids, like someone like me, it was in high school that I realized, I want to do something useful and not just be like playing all the time. So, what if someone decides late that they want to be engaging with this sort of thing? Is there some stuff out there now, or they?
Yeah, I mean two things. Yes, but I think in certain areas, I would say in Chicago, if you get in high school and decide that you want to code, there's only 5 high schools in the city that have those courses. So you then have to use something like the City of Learning and define informal places where you can learn those skill sets, because it's not in every school. You have to know. Chicago's a city that you have to know in the 8th grade what you want to do, so that you can find the high school that can support it, because it's just, if you go to your neighborhood high schools, you don't have access to that. But yeah, the whole City of Learning is, the purpose of it is to allow you to connect to places that can develop your skill set, regardless of when you decide that that's something that you have an interest in.
Thanks.
So Nicole, just off that,
Yes.
is that why you targeted middle school? Like I was asking.
Why are you targeting middle school?
Yeah, or I was wondering if there was something developmentally about middle school, so I just wonder if you could.
Well, the reason the reason we targeted middle school is because the context we were working in were middle grades. But I also, I feel like, I was saying like, I was telling someone this last night for dinner. I was always struck with the Renaissance period, and you go to Italy and Florence, and you think about Michelangelo and Da Vinci and how they did these variety of different skills. So we think of middle grades as an opportunity to expose you and at least get you to try. And so at that point in high school, it's more like what I want to focus in on. And so we think of them as stacked together. Middle school explore, so in our programs, you're going to have some video, you're going to have all those, you're going to be exposed to everything. You're not going to like anything. You might not like anything, but if you like something, then we direct you into and so we think it's best to do it in middle grades, because we know, at least in the Chicago context, it's just not, you really have to be targeted in where you do for high school.
Fabulous work. I think we have to move on.